Hello, everyone, and welcome to the season finale of Season 2 of Kicking It Classic with JCD as part of the PWP Nation Network. You can check out PWP Nation on Twitter at PWP Nation. You could follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/PWP Nation. And you can check out the website for lots of great news, interviews, editorials, opinions, and so much more at pwpnation.com. You could check me out, John JCD DiMaselli, at NYC1219. You could follow the show, Kicking It Classic with JCD, on Twitter at KITCWJCD. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Kicking It Classic with JCD. And you can email the show at kickingitclassicwithjcd@yahoo.com. You could also follow the Jay Aletto Show every week, also as part of PWP Nation. You could also check out Ashley Rose Nova of PWP Nation and follow her for all her content at ARoseCPE. So, here we are. It's the season finale of Season 2. And granted, this season wasn't as controversial as the first season in the sense of shows and everything. And I do want to apologize for some of the delays in the shows getting out there. It's a lot going on with remote learning and all that stuff. But I promise you, when we return the week of January 9th, 2021 for Season 3, we will be more on point with getting the shows out when they're meant to be and providing that content that hopefully you've enjoyed through the first two seasons so far. And when we come back on the week of January 9th, we're kicking it off with WCW Bash of the Beats 96. And who's the third man, brother? But before we get there, we have to finish this season. And with this season, we're going to go into the beaten to death show of Survivor Series 1997. And obviously we know everything about that with the screw job, but there's few more different aspects of that show and some of the domino effects that people sometimes forget and don't necessarily talk about. And that's what I'm going to go into here. We know the obvious. We know what happened, with Ring the Bell and all that other stuff. We're not going to delve too much into that, but we are going to delve into some of the circumstances that people may not realize leading up to it, and as well as what happened the 2 days after with the live Raw and then the taped Raw, because you got to remember back then they would do Raw live 1 week on Monday, and then they would tape the following week on Tuesday. So with that said, Survivor Series 1997. Now let's get the logistics of the show out of the way. The show took place November 9th, 1997 at the Center Bell Center, which would be the Bell Center, in Montreal, Canada, for an attendance of 20,593, and it actually had the tagline of Gang Rules. Now, why would they have that? You got to remember, you had the Hart Foundation, you had DX, you had the Nation as your three big factions. And then you had the Pro USA team, which was basically everybody who was feuding with the Hart Foundation. So you had about four groups going into the show to designate that tagline, which was fine. That was fitting. I guess to begin, you really got to go back to, WrestleMania 96, and we all know the story with the Iron Man match. Bret's contract was up, and while it was assumed he would end up back in WWF at some point, it wasn't necessarily a guarantee, especially with the way WCW was throwing money around at the time. There was a chance that Bret could leave, so of course they did the Iron Man match with the overtime finish. And we all know the story there. We all know, Bret eventually does come back to the company, and at the time signs a 20-year deal. That actually just would have expired a few years ago. How crazy is that? He signs a 20-year deal, which covered obviously his in-ring career, his post-ring career, and what he would do with the company going forward. Okay, no problem. We all know the story with WrestleMania 13. We've covered that. Shawn Michaels pulls his bullshit. basically refusing to put Bret over. Okay, whatever. That rematch doesn't happen. But now we get to SummerSlam 97. And, Shawn's the referee for Bret Hart versus The Undertaker, with the stipulation being if Hart doesn't win, he can never wrestle in the U.S. again. If Hart didn't win the title, he couldn't wrestle in the U.S. again. Shawn was the ref. Shawn was definitely going to screw Bret. However, that doesn't happen. Shawn accidentally hits Undertaker with the chair, which that's another thing for another time, when to really look at the basis for the Shawn Michaels heel turn in 1997, if you really go by it, it was an honest mistake that was taken completely awry. That might be another show for season 4, but I digress. So Shawn's a heel, feuding with Undertaker, and Bret is stuck in this lame-ass feud with the Patriot, Del Wilkes, to the point where Wilkes even gets a title shot at In Your House. And Hart's, while Shawn and Undertaker main event that show. Again, Raw seems to be built more around Shawn, Undertaker, the beginning of DX, Mick Foley kind of lightly getting involved. Rick Rude shows up, and there's Bret barely getting any. Well, he was getting time, but again, it was Del Wilkes, the Patriot. Vader was sprinkled in. The Bulldog was sprinkled in to team with Bret against Wilkes and Vader at the In Your House Bad Blood pay-per-view. So again, Hart is not exactly where you expect the WWF champion to be positioned, and it's all about Shawn and Undertaker, and here comes Ken Shamrock getting involved. So we get to Madison Square Garden, September, I want to say 1997. I was at the show. I don't remember the date. It's the show where Austin stunned McMahon. Now, if you go back and watch the Wrestling with Shadows documentary, this is the show where Vince and Bret supposedly have a meeting, and Vince tells Bret that he can't afford to keep paying Bret because he needs to put the money elsewhere, because WCW and Eric Bischoff are trying to put him out of business, and Vince thinks he needs to get out of the deal, and Bret should call Bischoff and see if the offer from a year prior still stood. This is all documented in the Wrestling with Shadows documentary. Bret apparently, at some point, it's not known when, it's not even really talked about in the documentary, but Bret is able to reach an agreement with Eric Bischoff. And despite what Bischoff has said in the past, before Bret steps foot into WCW, Bret is the one that Bischoff has always wanted. I mean, you could even go back to 1992 when Bret was the Intercontinental Champion. Part of the reason why he had to drop the title to the Mountie unexpectedly is, yes, he had 104 fever, but Bret's contract was also up, and Bret was looking to go potentially to WCW. He didn't. He resigned, and that's kind of why we are where we're at today. At the same time, you can see the product from the WWF side starting to get a little edgier. And anybody who knows anything about Bret, this was not Bret's cup of tea. Which is why him going to WCW kind of made no sense either, because WCW hadn't been bought and censored by AOL yet. So, you had the NWO with the suck it, the crotch chops, the ass talk, all that stuff that was going on, and he was going to walk into. And while Vince was heading down that road, Vince hadn't started it yet. So that's all going on. Let's get to the final Raw before Survivor Series. And again, you got to remember, the internet is not what it is today. There wasn't 170 news sites. There wasn't podcast. Again, there was AOL, there was these sheets, these newsletters. They were literally newsletters that got mailed to your house once a week, once every 2 weeks. And then there were these wrestling hotlines, 976 numbers and 1-900 numbers. Now, I lived in New York City, and as I've stated previously in the past, I had a hotline I was able to call called Coach Kirk's Wrestling Line. And he had first said that something was going on with Bret. I was 20 at the time, so I remember it well. And something was going on, but he didn't know what, and involved Bret's future with the company. A couple days later, the old WWF on AOL posts a statement about Bret's future, saying that Bret and the company might be looking to part ways. So now we get to Raw. And Jim Ross, the entire show, keeps saying, make sure you watch this match on Sunday, because the likelihood is you will never see it again. Again, the news hasn't broke, but that is some very weird wording on JR's part at the time. We get to the weekend. Well, no, let's fast forward a little. There was no Raw taped on Tuesday because that was the go-home show into the pay-per-view, and Raw post-Survivor Series was going to be live. We get to, I want to say, Wednesday, and the news is out. Bret's gone. He's leaving. He's going to WCW. That's it. Now, what's going to happen? What's going to happen with the title? What's going to, how is he going to depart the company? The rumor floating out there was that there would be a non-finish at Survivor Series, and Bret would show up at Raw and vacate the title. That was one of the plans. I can tell you as clear as the day is that there was also a plan, because the following weekend was a house show at Madison Square Garden. And the advertised main event was a fatal four-way for the WWF title. It was Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, and Ken Shamrock. And the big rumor going around, and this is supposedly what Bret offered to do, was Bret offered to drop the title to Ken Shamrock in that fatal four-way. That was Bret's first option on the table. So anybody that... See, this is where it gets a little tricky, because with what ended up happening and what the reality ended up being, it's kind of hard to a degree to feel terrible for Bret in the sense of what actually happened. But let's get there. So there's multiple things on the table. Well, WWF ran a house show in Detroit that Friday night. And this footage is in the Wrestling with Shadows documentary. Word definitely had gotten out. And Bret's, I think, in a 6-man. And the entire match is "You Sold Out" chants, which at the time, for anybody in ECW or WWF or WCW, when you were going somewhere else and the word finally got out, that was the chant you got. So yeah, Bret was bamboozled with those chants in Detroit at, I want to say, the Joe Louis Arena. It probably was the Joe Louis Arena at that time. So now we get to Sunday. We're in Survivor Series and we're at the building. Apparently, Bret does not want to drop the title to Shawn in Montreal. Doesn't want to. Again, I'll do a speech on Raw. I'll leave the title in the ring. I'll drop it to Ken Shamrock at Madison Square Garden, but I'm not dropping it to Shawn in Montreal. Vince, while he wants to believe Bret, unfortunately has some WCW PTSD from Medusa. What would stop Bret from leaving his hotel Monday morning and not going to Raw, but instead going to Nitro with the WWF title, especially knowing that Bischoff would totally do it? and throwing it in a trash can. And you can't blame Vince. Bischoff was out for blood. Bischoff could say whatever he wants all these years later, that he was never out to put WWF out of business. In that sense, Eric Bischoff's a liar. But again, Vince has some PTSD and starts scrambling. And apparently, he's trying to talk to Bret. Bret's not budging. So now what do you do? And this is when supposedly the top secret probation meeting is held with Vince, Earl Hebner, Bruce Pritchard, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, and for some reason, I don't want to say it 100%, but for some reason, I'm feeling Pat Patterson was there as well. That one I don't know 100%, but I want to say Patterson was there. And as Triple H has documented in numerous times in multiple documentaries, he's the one that said, fuck him, screw him. He doesn't want to do business the right way. We'll make him do it the right way. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but apparently, I don't know. I mean, listen, none of us were in that room, but apparently Hunter takes credit. Maybe he's the one that wants to take the heat, take the bullet, but Hunter for years has been the one that's taking credit for the Montreal screw job. So that's when the decision's made, and we know the rest. Ring the bell. And, I mean, you watch that match. Hunter is too fast to get out there. And even Bulldog and Owen look like they're ready to jump out there to do this double disqualification, non-finish ending. Well, that obviously doesn't happen. We know how that ends. Bret in the ring, he types WCW in the air backwards, by the way. And now we're going to go to Raw. Now, here's the thing that gets left out in all this. Bret was going to be released of his contract as of November 30th, 1997. Not November 9th, not November 10th, not November 15th. Bret was under contract with Vince until the 30th. That plays a factor, but we'll get there. So we get to Raw, obviously no Bret. Now, you got to remember, too, Nitro was 3 hours. No, Nitro wasn't 3 hours, but it was 2 hours, but it added an hour earlier than Raw. Nitro went 8 to 10. Raw went 9 to 11. So you have that. And before Raw even gets on the air, I should backtrack. I'm a little bit all over the place, so stick with me. A couple of talents. Mick Foley, Ron Simmons. I know there was like one or two more decided not to work the show out of protest. Obviously, Owen Hart didn't. The British Bulldog didn't. Jim the Anvil Neidhart didn't. But they weren't the only ones. I think there was like one or two others besides Simmons and Foley who did not work the show out of protest of what happened. What's interesting about that is Stone Cold Steve Austin is doing his segment because he had just defeated Owen Hart for the Intercontinental title at Survivor Series, and out comes The Rock. What a lot of people don't remember is that was not the original plan for that segment or that feud. The original plan was for that to be Simmons, that we were going to head to an Austin Farouk feud over the IC title. Who knows? Maybe we could have gone into The Rock Austin later on, through the nation, but it was not supposed to be Rock Austin from the get-go. It's funny how things work out. Now, you've got Nitro on at 8, and the entire NWO comes out with Canadian flags, and they're singing the Canadian national anthem, and Bischoff cuts the line, and Bret Hart, because you're such a knockout kind of guy, which is, of course, in acknowledgement of the fact that Bret punched out Vince McMahon in the locker room. So Bischoff announced the Bret Hart signing like by 8:06. So Shawn Michaels comes out at 9. And Michaels to this day claims, well, no, let me rephrase that, not to this day. Michaels at the time claimed he was not going to really address what happened at Survivor Series. He was going to kind of be diplomatic, this and that, but because somebody drew first blood, i.e. Bischoff, an hour earlier, he was going to unload on everybody, and he did. He went after Hart, he went after Hogan, he went after Savage, he went after pretty much everybody not named Hall, Nash, and X-Pac, and moves on and starts his program with Ken Shamrock. Now, the reason why Bret Hart being on the contract till November 30th comes into play is 2 weeks later when Raw was live again, they announced that Bret Hart is going to appear on Raw to address what happened in Montreal. How can this be? Remember, no Facebook, no Twitter, no type of social media, so there was no way for Bret Hart to say, no, I'm not going to be there. This was the infamous midget episode. This was also the infamous Jim Neidhart send-off episode. So, they were able to advertise Hart and do whatever they wanted to do. Of course, there was the Bret Screwed Bret interview because Bret was still on the contract. And if Vince wanted to, he could have sat there, told Bret he needed to come to Raw, and then turn around and held Bret for breach of contract. He didn't do that. So, Bret has recently stated that he doesn't understand what Vince's thinking was back then because Vince told him he couldn't afford the 20-year deal that he signed with Bret. Yet, according to Bret, he gave the equivalent of what would have been the entire 20-year deal to Mike Tyson to appear at the Rumble, and the Raws, and WrestleMania 14. Where does that money come from? Well, you could say, he took Bret's money and put it there, but it's not like you took 1 year of Bret's money. You took the whole 20 years of Bret money and gave it to Mike Tyson in one shot. There are people that believe the screw job was a work and an inside job. And if you look at the effects on both companies, I could see that. I don't necessarily buy that. I've never bought into that. But instead, what I think Bret was set in his ways. And as the top guy in the company, you have that pull. I think what Vince wanted to do is I think Vince knew they had to go in a completely different direction. And he knew Bret was going to be a problem, that Bret wasn't going to want to. And, Bret might have stuck around till WrestleMania 14, maybe worked with Austin again, maybe worked with a Rocky, a Shamrock, but sooner or later, the shit was going to hit the fan with Bret one way or another. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think Vince having to publicly release Bret would have been a bigger nightmare than the screw job itself. I know that sounds crazy, and I know people can be like, JCD, you're out of your mind. How could you say that? But I really, if you take a step back and think about what happened when Vince had to release Kurt Angle. That was a guy that had about 6.5 years in the company. Multiply that at least tenfold, and that would have been WWF releases Bret Hart. Would have been crazy. I think Vince knew what he wanted to do. I think he looked at his roster, knew who would fit, who wouldn't, and kind of made it seem like he was doing Bret a favor to avoid the headache that Bret would have become. That's what I really believe, that this was a case of Vince knew he wanted to do A. Bret wasn't going to never be on board with that. I can't picture Bret, on board with a choppy or pee-pee type angle or, anything that went on during the Attitude Era. So he let Bret go. Listen, you know what? You could be the best worker in the world, but if you don't fit what we're doing, I don't need you. And if you've got the potential to become a headache, especially when he started to speak out, like if you listen to what Bret has said about WCW at the time, the smut, the cursing, that's not for me, the vulgarity, Vince was about to become that. You've already got your top guy speaking out against that with your competition. There's no way he's going to do a 180 and be for it when it's your product. I mean, it's very odd, and, listen, Bret carried it with him for a long, long time. I mean, it took I don't want to say miracle, because that's a rough word, but I mean, the stroke led to at least some sort of reconciliation between Bret and Vince to at least get Bret to Titan Tower to do the Bret Hart DVD, do the Hall of Fame, but not appear at WrestleMania. And that was the other thing too. You had that Vince Shawn match, and everyone thought Bret was going to show up. He didn't. Bret did not. Bret stuck true to his word. It's amazing, that Vince was able to finally get him to appear in 2010 and get him back under the fold. I don't know if that happens. Well, it probably does, but it's probably a little more awkward if Vince has to tell Bret, yeah, I fired you because you're not what I needed anymore. I think Vince gets a little bit, maybe not deservedly so, but gets a little bit of a pass because he was able to tell Bret, listen, I had to do what I had to do for my business to survive. So, that to me, that's the story. Those are some of the other parts that often get forgotten in the Montreal Screwjob. Again, for Kicking It Classic with JCD, I am your host, John JCD Dinicelli. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you the week of January 9th, 2021. Hopefully things are better. Stay safe. Have a happy Thanksgiving, a Merry Christmas, whatever holiday you celebrate at the end of the year. Happy New Year, and wear a mask. Let's get through this thing together. Again, on behalf of Kicking It Classic JCD, I am John JCD Dinicelli. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next year.